Hello, this is Chas with Heirloom Leaves and Seeds, and today I thought it would be interesting if we talked a little bit about butterflies, caterpillars, and their host plants. Now, I live in Tennessee, and the four I wanted to talk about today is the monarch, the swallowtail, the checker spot, and the fritillary caterpillars and the butterflies. So let's start with the monarch. The monarch butterfly is probably one of the most recognized butterflies in America. And most people know that they like milkweed. But did you know that if you want to attract them to your garden, it is important that you grow milkweed that is native to your area? Now, here in Tennessee, I have grown the common milkweed and the swamp milkweed. Now, I purchased the common milkweed seeds, and they were really easy to start from seed, and they did well, and I planted them, they transplanted well. Now, the swamp milkweed, I actually dug up from a field because it was one that gets mowed every year. And they were just coming up, and they were really nice plants. And I thought, I'm just going to transplant them, and then there I'll have my swamp milkweed, and I know those are native. Now, the only thing I would suggest is if you decide to grow milkweed at your property, make sure to put it in an area where it can be a little wild because they like to spread. I'll notice they just kind of pop up in different areas from where they were originally planted. I would guess that it's by some sort of underground runner, probably. They're not obnoxious, but they will just come up in different areas. But if you mow nearby, you can just cut them down and it'll be all right. Another reason why you would want to put them in a kind of more wild area is because you do not want, and this goes for any of these host plants, just imagine if you had milkweed growing in a nice and tidy landscape spot, you're going to notice those caterpillars very easily. And plus, the leaves will get chewed on, so it's a little unsightly. So you're not going to want to put a host plant right by your front door. I mean, you might, but if that would bother you, you're probably not going to want to put it, right by your front door. But another reason you're going to want to put it in a place that's a little protected, it blends in, is because you want to protect the caterpillars from predators. Because just, kind of think about it. If you just have a plant here all by itself and it's mulched in a nice, tidy, landscaped area, predators are probably going to pick off those caterpillars really fast because they're going to be so noticeable. So it's good to have them growing up with other things. That way, predators aren't going to notice them quite as much. And I'm mostly talking about birds because birds will pick off caterpillars really fast. Just make sure that you get a milkweed variety that is native to your area and put it in an area where it's going to be hidden a little bit and it will protect the caterpillars. All right, next on my list is the swallowtail butterfly. Now, what I have found for my garden is they like dill and they like fennel. Now, I have grown, this is my dill seed. I collect it every year, and this is bouquet dill. Now, this dill I originally bought for the bouquets that I have for the farmer's market, but I've mentioned this in another video that the dill, it attracts them so much that I could not even find hardly a stem of dill that did not have caterpillars on it. So what I would do is I would take a few stems and I would look at them what I thought was pretty thoroughly, and it didn't matter because I think what happened was the eggs are usually hidden pretty well on the stem of dill. And there was a bouquet I brought home one day from the farmer's market that didn't sell, and I had it in our house. And before I knew it, I looked over and there was a little swallowtail caterpillar eating the dill. And this happened in another situation. So from now on, I'm going to leave the dill at home, let the caterpillars eat it, because I want to leave the caterpillars outside where they belong. And so they can hatch and just continue their life cycle. And one good thing about dill is it likes to reseed itself. So if that's something you would like to do, just let the flowering heads go to seed and just let them disperse the seeds. And before you know it, you'll have volunteers next spring. And this is what I do, and I actually haven't planted dill in a long time. If you're a beginner at gardening or host plants for caterpillars, I think dill is a really good place to start because dill germinates really easily and it's easy to grow, it's easy to take care of. So I would suggest dill for any sort of beginner as far as gardening or growing host plants for caterpillars for the first time. And fennel as well. I mean, last year the fennel was covered in swallowtail caterpillars. All right, next on my list is the checker spot. So here I grow Echinacea purpurea and Rudbeckia triloba. And both of those are host plants for the checker spot. And one year, when I was kind of new to gardening, I noticed that the Echinacea that I had grown from seed was getting eaten by a bunch of these black, prickly little caterpillars. And just underneath the leaves, there's just tons of them. And I was like, you know, this has to be a pest. And so I was sitting there plucking off the leaves, and I was like, maybe the echinacea is a host for this caterpillar. Maybe it's a good, beautiful caterpillar. And so I looked it up, and sure enough, it was. So I let the caterpillars go ahead and eat the echinacea, and hopefully a bunch of the checker spot butterfly ended up hatching. And it was pretty interesting to see the whole process. And it was also neat to learn that I had a new host plant for this butterfly. All right, and now last on my list is the Fritillary butterfly. Now, for these, this one might be a little bit tricky because I've never tried to grow a wild type of passion flower. I just happened to see this. Now, passion flower grows wild here in Tennessee, and I remember one year I had seen a flower blooming, and I told my husband, I'm like, hey, why don't you just let this bloom? I've always thought passion flower was really neat and interesting, and plus it has medicinal value. So I told my husband, I'm like, just avoid this little area. And so he didn't mow it, and this was out in our field, so I guess technically bush hog it. And so he let that grow a little wild, and I was so happy because you would not believe the passion flower that was growing out there. And then I noticed that they were getting these little caterpillars all over them. And at this point, I had no idea what they were. I'm like, once again, I started to think, I wonder if this is the host plant for something. And I looked it up, and sure enough, it's for the Fritillary butterfly. So that was a really fun experiment, and this will be the third year I know where they grow, and I'll have him just avoid that area. And it's been really interesting just to see if they come to the passion flower patch each year. And hopefully they will be back this year. But I always think it's really fun just to see what will happen if you let an area on your property just grow a little bit wild and see what happens. In another instance, I thought it was really interesting because we have a fence row by our neighbor's pond and we get blackberries there every year. And we actually pick them. We actually get a lot of blackberries from that fence row. But in that blackberry patch, we don't mow, you know, we'll get close, but there's a strip of land that's close to that fence row where the blackberries are. And it's amazing what has grown in there. We've seen some wild clematis, a very pretty lobelia. It had like really bright red flowers. I mean, it stood out from way across the field. So it's really fun if you can to let a little section of your property or your garden grow a little bit wild and see what happens. And if anything undesirable, like maybe a great big thistle, you can just dig that out. And it's interesting as well because you could just do like a 3 foot square area and see what happens there. It doesn't have to be a huge acre that you let grow wild. Sometimes even just a little patch is really neat to see what will come up. And last is, if you do want to try to attract some caterpillars and butterflies to your garden, it's also important to remember not to spray any sort of chemicals or pesticides or anything like that, because that will probably deter them from coming to the garden, at least in big amounts. We grow everything natural and organic. I don't even use organic pesticides or fertilizers. I just use compost and cover crops, and that's all I use. Yeah, try not to use any pesticides or chemicals if possible. The other thing you might want to consider is to plant things that will attract the butterflies. And one that I have no doubt that will attract butterflies is zinnias. Zinnias are amazing at attracting all sorts of butterflies. Sometimes when I'm out there in the zinnia patch, it just is amazing how many butterflies are there at any given time. It's amazing, really. And even if I didn't sell cut flowers at our farmer's market, I would still grow zinnias just because they are so good at attracting butterflies. And another good one is the butterfly weed. And that is one that gets the little orange clusters of flowers. They like that as well. Zinnias, cosmos, marigolds, even the flowers of mint they really like. They like pretty much all of them. That's going to do it for today. And I hope you guys will try to grow some host plants for some butterflies, especially in your own area. I am sure there is a ton of different flowers for different areas, but these are the ones for Tennessee that I have noticed attract certain butterflies and their caterpillars. So I hope you guys have a great weekend, and thanks for stopping by.